Good morning, everybody. I'll request everybody to settle down at the back. But first, let me confirm one thing, that both of us sitting over here are here in flesh and blood. We are not the digital versions. So this is not a hologram. Of course, in future, you might see some holograms and digital versions and digital twins talking to you. Perhaps the audience will be like that. But this is just to say that, it's always good to have face-to-face and people-to-people connect despite the digital world that we are living in. I think this subject of Metaverse is exciting, and it also is sometimes very confusing. So I'm going to request Rajan to talk about it. Rajan comes with a fantastic history of being a pioneer in the field of digital businesses. Rajan, first I want to request you to talk a little bit about what you have done in the last few years in terms of creating businesses of a digital era, but perhaps before the digital era actually began. And then we want to get into what is Metaverse, what does it mean for us, what are the opportunities, what are the risks, how do entrepreneurs, professionals, businesses plan for it, how do we ensure that we get the most out of it rather than getting hurt by the shift which is happening. So perhaps request you to talk a little bit about your work.
Thanks, Pranjal, and a very good morning to all of you, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, AIMA, for having me here. It's a pleasure and honor to be with all of you here today. I think, as Pranjal mentioned, I come from a third-generation business family that was primarily into large-scale manufacturing, headquartered out of Thailand. We built large companies with the Aditya Birla Group there and many other areas of interest. And when I was looking nearly a decade and a half back as to how would we look at the future or the next 30 years for our group and where would that be, we really took a very drastic shift and, said that we need to really be different from the way things have happened so far, because obviously what gets you here won't take you there. And I think it's important to realize that at the right time. And somewhere we felt that, instead of building, manufacturing and allocating capital there and doing a lot more, and then putting a strong marketing team to sell to people who have probably moved on, is there a way for us to tap into that next generation consumer? Is there a way for us to engage with them? Is there a way for us to build trust with them? And then really quickly synthesize things that can be delivered to them in a systematic asset-light mechanism. So the shift from JetLine to JetSynthesys, I think, really came from there. And when we were looking at the consumer of the future, we really narrowed it down to Gen Zs. These are people who were born from 1995 onwards and really who are today 27, 28-year-olds, but that generation has a very different attitude to life, a very different way of experiencing things that most of us have experienced very differently. And as we started to understand Gen Zs, we said we want to engage with their passions, and we also want to be able to address their concerns. And I think we realized very quickly that gaming, esports, and digital forms of engagement were very, very critical to the way they would appreciate and engage with each other as well as with platforms and enterprises. And then really looked at, areas like health and income, so wellness and livelihoods, again, in a very Gen Z context. And that really set us up pretty well, because we started creating virtual worlds, and I think gaming is really about, letting an imagination go beyond what you could think of and really create future virtual worlds within which people will engage and do many, many activities. And I think that led to really where we are, with the Metaverse. So that's really the broad, story, how we have got to where we are as of now.
Thanks, Rajan. I think that story of being ahead of the curve is always easy when you talk about it later. But when you're actually stepping into it and you're ahead of what the industry is doing, there is always a fear and there is always a risk. But let me pause by asking, how many of us in the hall can say that we understand Metaverse? Would you raise your hands? Okay. I can see maybe 5% of the people here understand what is Metaverse. So I think this is exactly the reason why we are having this session, to get a better understanding of what it is. It's also changing very rapidly, but Metaverse, I'm going to request by asking you a simple question. Metaverse, what is the definition? But it's not just about gaming. There is an industrial metaverse, there's a metaverse in health, there's a metaverse in financial and BFSI segment. So there are several elements and dimensions of it. But Rajan, how would you define metaverse?
No, thanks, Pranjal. And I saw the hands go up. So given that there are limited, I'm going to kind of go a little more into detail to give you a foundational thought process of what has shifted and what has changed. Like I was saying, right, once your mind is exposed to a new idea, it can never return to its original dimension. I think we experience that in pretty much everything. All of us through our lives have experienced that, right? Once you're challenged, you see something different and new, very hard for your human mind to go back to its original dimension. And I think the internet really did that. It changed the world like nothing else has, at least in our generations. So if we looked at the first generation of the internet, or what we call Web 1.0, was really a one-way information street, right? You had people who were, you kind of replaced your print with a digital version. What enterprises did, they put up websites that communicated what they do, where their contact is, where they're located. Web 2.0, and this happened somewhere in the early 2000s, actually made a big shift because it made it a two-way communication. So technologies that drove Web 2.0 enabled you to now transact. It was built around some new changes that started to happen, even technologically, that drove this big change. So now you could actually buy and sell on the internet and do many, many other things in a two-way interaction. Gaming and a lot of that on the mobile and others, evolved in that era. And what also evolved was the penetration of smartphones, personalized devices, 3G, 4G, cloud infrastructure, making it easier to do a lot more of that faster and cheaper. And in that generation, while most traditional companies really looked at how can they do better what they're doing and use a digital world, the world's largest and most valuable companies today have got created. So if you look at Amazon, you look at Facebook, you look at Google, they were all built in that era of Web 2.0, where what they did is they actually created platforms that connected this entire enterprise group together to be able to create the most valuable businesses of the future. So like what you were saying, Pranjal, it was an early start in Web 2.0 that enabled all of these to go and occupy the space that other businesses would need to reach out to consumers. So today, if you want to sell a product, you go and put it up on Amazon. If you want to get your product visible to others, you really advertise on Google and Facebook. And it's crazy how they have nearly 80% market share of all advertising today in digital, because they were built early, they were built as businesses around Web 2.0. What has happened with Web 3.0, and the biggest difference between 1 and 2 is that today, you have a digital asset or a digital value that can be ascribed in a digital world. So just think about it. You can actually have a product in a digital world that has got value, right? Not only does it have value, it also has value and utility. So if you look at the technologies that have really driven that, it is truly, I think, blockchain that enables one to create a secure environment that can enable transactions to happen. And that transaction actually happens so securely that it is actually become a currency. There's a reason why they call it cryptocurrency, because it is like a currency. It cannot be it is non-fungible. It has got full transparency. There is a full tracking of where the particular token has moved, who owns it, how did you come to own it. It can be traded. And the beauty is, unlike a currency note, which has, say, 100 rupee value, this can have a utility. So it can say 100 rupee value plus a lunch with Pranjal. Right? Now, for someone, that utility of a lunch with Pranjal might mean 1 million rupees, celebrities, etc. And for others, it might mean nothing. So it gives a variable value to that same ability of what we call currency. And that's what actually created so many currencies and this whole hype that we saw, because everybody was ascribing some utility that they thought different was valuable and did it.
One thing which my understanding is, and there are various interpretations, the one big difference in Web 3.0 or Metaverse is that in first and second, you were engaging with the internet. But in the third version, which is the Metaverse, you are inside it. Which means a digital version of you is inside it and engaging and interacting with the internet. How far would you say is correct?
No, absolutely. I think you're inside it and it is decentralized. So the biggest difference in Web3 is you don't have ownership. And I think that's the biggest disruption enterprises are going to face. And those early adopters, and we see that in the US, I think the sneaker companies, you see Adidas and Nike, right? The shoes that get created today, right, which you thought will come from one company, and you will sell shoes to everyone, the creator economy there can go create the best design of the shoe, right? The avatar can try it on there, you can get a 3D printer version done and have it delivered in your home or wherever you are, with the same quality, the same thing that was done in a large-scale factory. So there are multiple technologies. So it's 3D printing, it's materials in 3D printing, it's the experiential of AR, VR in the metaverse, in the internet, the blockchain that is enabling you to both own an NFT and then own that in the physical world, and multiple technologies like that that are driving this entire accelerated pace of the metaverse. So the reason why I spent a little time focusing on the economy, because today we do have a digital world which has an economy which is pretty significant, right? I mean, there are several $100 billion of the real world cash that has gone in to creating digital value. There is it's a $50 billion industry. Some predictions say it will be $1 trillion, others say it will be a $13 trillion industry in the next 10, 15 years. Of course, there has been a slowdown. It depends on who is the, absorber of that economy. But that shift of having a virtual world in which people will realize their reality is very different from the world that exists today. And I think the initial days of Metaverse, Pranjal, is actually connecting your real world products in a physical world, is I think the first stepping stone for an enterprise, right? Again, like a Web 2.0 journey where you say, listen, I'm going to at least put up my goods on a website. So right now you have a Metaverse presence.
I'm going to ask you for some examples across different sectors. And those of you who have questions, there are slips on your table. Please write your questions and give it to the AIMA team, and they will be able to bring it to me, and then we can take some of those questions and address them. But how many people are from an industrial manufacturing background here? So I'm sure all of you would have heard and at least experienced the whole concept of predictive and remote maintenance, where you, in your virtual world, an engineer can wear a headset, connect to a person who's in a remote plant, and solve a problem where both these individuals are talking to each other in real time, looking at the same machine or component, and then trying to resolve a problem. That is an example of Metaverse where you engage in a digital format as humans, but your digital version is engaging. And for that, I think, Rajan, one of the critical requirements is the kind of infrastructure we require, including 5G and 6G connectivity. But what are the examples or use cases of Metaverse across different sectors in your experience? You come from a manufacturing background as well.
No, thanks. I think, these experiences are still use cases, but what you rightly said, today if you want to look at the technology that's driving this, right? It's basically augmented reality, virtual reality. Now we have extended reality. And soon we're going to have a large use cases around mixed reality, right? And I mean, if you really look at what that means, we can have a whole discussion, especially in an Indian context when you talk of, multiple realities and this is Maya and, that is another world. But truly, people today are engaging in multiple realities at the same time, right? So think about it. You have a car, you have, the frame there, but nothing else in there. And you have avatars who are trying to fix, different pieces of the engine, fixing different things, actually moving it around with gestures, and actually creating something that has got some physical piece, everything else which is being done, digitally, and a product that is coming out in the end that could be valuable either in the digital world or in the real world. That's the big difference. Because if we interact with Gen Zs today, it's shocking, right? We do that all the time. And we say, if you had to buy a home, where would you buy it? See, we buy it in the Metaverse. We can't afford a home in the real world today. Even if we afford a home, we'll buy a small home. In that, what kind of goods can we keep? We'll have a small cupboard. So I'm going to buy my fashion there. I'm going to go and, socialize there. I'm going to go to restaurants there. They're buying land. They're buying homes, right? They are going and interacting and experiencing. The first time they experience a product which they're going to use in the real world is actually in the metaverse. So as an enterprise, if you're not there, you probably miss that consumer completely, because that first experience, that first touch point is not happening in the real world as it was in the past.
But what's interesting, Rajan, is while the Gen Z and the younger generation is adapting and adopting it faster, Metaverse impacts all of us. Age is not a barrier, in the sense that 50-year-olds, 60-year-olds, all senior professionals, entrepreneurs are getting impacted in some way by the new business models, the new practices which the technology which you mentioned is creating. So how do people like us, how do entrepreneurs like you, how do senior CXOs, how do they adapt and how do they identify the opportunities here?
No, the reason I'm saying Gen Zs is because about 87% of the 400 million people who are today interconnected and engaging in a metaverse are Gen Zs. In a country like India, I think 1 in 10 people in the world is technically an Indian under the age of 28, right? So we have the largest population of that segment, where it is, like earlier we used to say digitally native, now it is like digital always. It's a continuous world for them, pretty much how our real world is continuous. So what we do, we say we have a real world and then we connect digitally for a few hours, we'll say digital detox and etc. Right? The metaverse is a connected, continuous world all the time. So you want to detox from, you come to the real world for some time and you go back there. And you might think that I'm overemphasizing this point, and it sounds a little unreal, but you just think at the technologies that are shaping the future, right? If you look at what we are seeing with generative AI, even today, the addiction we face when we go to our social media and are offered content that so aligns with our thought process, right? Because you're able to segment it, right? We start engaging a lot more, right? Is the same thing that is happening in the metaverse, where it is generating not only for your personality in the real world, but your avatar personality that you have defined to live in that world. Why do we go and, you see youngsters today go and drink and all, they want to break away from this reality, right? For whatever reason, right? That reality they're finding there. I mean, it's scary sometimes, but there you can be what you want, you can be who you want, you can be an avatar, you can have personality traits of a different type.
How will this impact business? And I think there are some questions here. There's a gentleman here with question. Can we get some people to pick up the questions, please? Thank you.
The way it will impact business, Pranjal, is that this generation is going to be 30% of the employable workforce by 2030. This is the, you see the 25 to 50, if we talk of the next 25 years of, particularly of India, we talk of the Amrit Kal, that's going to be the generation that's going to be probably the biggest consumers of products, because they are going to have livelihoods. And interestingly, their livelihoods will come both in the real world as well as in the metaverse. So metaverse creates jobs. You can actually be a plumber in the metaverse and get paid for it, right? And what are you doing? You're plumbing a home in a digital world, which is so hard for somebody in the real world to even imagine what does that activity truly mean.
You refer to generative AI, which is about ChatGPT. Any thoughts on that? Because we have a question here.
Well, I don't know how many of you have used ChatGPT, but pretty much, if you wanted to see what I was saying today, you go to ChatGPT and ask that and it will just rant it out for you, right? Or anything. You want to write a code on something, you just go and say, I want a code for this, it will give it to you. Generative AI has now, through ChatGPT, been experienced by individual consumers, in a very simple, user-friendly manner. And I think the biggest impact of that is going to come to enterprises. Because, I was in the Silicon Valley just 10 days ago, and I think historically over my last, 20 years there, whenever I have visited, there's always this one buzzword that wherever you go, it comes up, and it's always a word that's going to change the shape of humanity and is going to change the world. The word this time was generative AI. But cumulatively I heard, I'll just tell you, 200 million jobs that will be lost around the world in enterprises, right, by about 6 companies, right, being able to create that. Now they say that that value they're going to capture. I'm just giving you an example. There's the ambition of the vision with which. How is generative AI doing it? It's just a machine that's getting smarter and better than the human at everything that the human does. Earlier it was a task, now it is going deeper, and with quantum, where your processing capacity is going to go up 1 billion times faster, as intuitive as it gets, the machine is going to become probably much smarter than the human, and therefore this thing with generative AI and quantum and AR, VR and Metaverse all moving together is really what is worrying. Now, what is going to be the pace of this? Definitely, there are checks and balances, there are governments, there are countries, because Metaverse is creating new countries. People feel citizens of Metaverses. You have so many people in the world who are a first citizen in some other country, which is in the Metaverse, already happening.
The way I understand ChatGPT is it's really the expression which is fantastic. The way it articulates content is the real effort, which is what the generative AI is. But the content that it generates is not necessarily the best, because we don't know what the source is. It doesn't always cite the source. So it means that whenever you see a new product or a solution, you still have to use your own brain filters. You cannot say that this is the final solution and answer to everything. The same way that you don't go online, do a search, and the first answer which you get, you think that's the absolute truth. So therefore, I think we also have to have our own guardrails in terms of how do we distinguish between what is good for society, how to interpret the output, Rajan, and therefore, that's one of the questions over here, that do we need some kind of a self-regulation or an external regulatory framework, some kind of guardrails to ensure that we are not misled? And I'll give you an example. So there are 3 different chat GPTs which have come up. China has come up with its own, but Microsoft has chat GPT and Google has Sparrow, created by DeepMind. So what Sparrow has done, I'm sure you know, but for the audience, they have put some guardrails where they say that if you ask a question which is criminal, it will not answer. If you ask a question, how do I steal a car? It will say, I'm sorry, I'm not allowed to give you an answer which breaks the law. That is an example of a guardrail, some kind of a security provision to ensure that you do not get misled. In the internet, today or YouTube, you can find a way to kill people in 20 different ways. So there is no regulation. But today, my question to you, Rajan, and I think that's come from the audience, 2 or 3 people have asked, what kind of regulation, if at all, is required?
No, absolutely. I think there is a good need and a reason for us to find ways to have policy and regulation catch up with technology. Problem is, it always catches up. So technology tends to stay a little ahead. And essentially with generative AI, Pranjal, the biggest challenge is that it's going to get better over time, right? Because the more you interact, the more it understands from a larger cross-section of people, it just gets better. It's just like the Amazon, irrespective of what will happen, you'll get the best product, you'll get the best price. It just becomes smarter, right? And that's going to happen with every area, in different aspects. But, and it's interesting how industry and enterprise is solving for that. You talked of content generation through ChatGPT, right? A big challenge is plagiarism, right? Because ultimately, if I am quoting some creative content and it's come out from some sources, probably I'm plagiarizing it from different pieces. There is an enterprise that has come up which only looks at that and identifies the clauses that are there and resolves for that problem, right? So many things that we will see with emerging technologies is that the opportunities to figure out ways to comply with today's governance norms and standards actually get, found out there. Let's take YouTube, for example. Today I'm a music composer, since you talked of creator, and I created a song, right? And, you say, there is so much piracy and someone is taking that and doing that. What does YouTube do? It allows anybody to put up content, but YouTube as a platform will identify through a smart algorithm that this song or this content belongs to so and actually give a part of that revenue to that person from that thing. So the business has solved the issue around governance and regulation. And that's the beauty about most of the businesses that we will see emerging today. It'll come out of that. But my biggest worry is about the ethics and the values when man and machine actually come together. If machine is telling a man, go here and jump, I mean, should man be doing that? I mean, I think there are going to be so many issues that are going to come up. And it's extremely critical that the world comes together to understand and build standards, etc. for this, which unfortunately in today's crisis-led world has just made countries more inward-looking. And, we talk of multilateralism actually dying out and, becoming so polarized that we also don't really know where that is going to happen. So I think it's going to be very important for countries, people and others, and particularly for the companies and enterprises that are building these solutions to self-regulate and create harmony in society to enable some of these things to succeed at scale.
Rajan, what's the advice you give to individuals, to professionals, to painters, to creators on adapting to this situation? We know that we are living in a world of constant skilling and learning, but that's easier said than done. How often can you upskill? And perhaps the new level of upskilling may not even be attuned to your temperament, for example. I mean, if I have to upskill to become a pilot, obviously I can't because I'm not used to doing something. What is the best way for individuals, professionals, students to keep up to pace and keep themselves relevant? You refer to 200 million jobs being destroyed, but there would be new opportunities coming in. What we are seeing today is a serious gap between the new jobs and demands which are being created and the availability of people to fill those roles. What is the way ahead?
No, I think we have seen in history that every time there has been a new revolution, actually there have been more jobs that have got created. The problem is in which areas have they got created and how have they shaped up have been distinctly different. I think that same thing continues, even with this generation. I think what is really changing at a core is education and how do we address education, right? So the Google generation gave information. So you really didn't need to have rote learning because anything you wanted you could get. Now rote learning had other impact on a human being. It impacts your creativity. It makes you better analytical later on because your memory power is built earlier, etc. Today with ChatGPT, you have knowledge. Literally you get the best of all information pooled out together. Google would give you 5 locations you can go to. You still got to pick the right website. You still have to go and pick it and put 5 things together to be able to address it. ChatGPT does it better than any human can and will do it even better. So now you have knowledge and pretty much wisdom with you available on the tip of a finger. Now, what do you evolve to next? Right? How do you really be able to do something that people want but is not available in the current context? And I think that's the challenge and that's the gap that we are seeing today. So I think the first most important, at least for a country like India and worldwide where we're going to have to feed millions of people or a lot of livelihoods, the digital literacy, the understanding of, being able to just cope with this transition is very important. Now, Singapore is doing an excellent attempt, and I know we keep quoting Singapore, it's a small country, but Singapore has set up digital centers around the city. If you go now, and 50-year-olds, 70-year-olds, 80-year-olds go there, spend weeks and days to understand digital and being used. Because without that, it's become like a life tool, right? You need to be able to be engaged in that world. Like we talked of Metaverse, where people are engaged nearly full-time. At least you got to be able to partially engage with that world. You need to understand what that world means and the impact of that world on your world and life today. I think that understanding is probably the first level, and therein lies a big opportunity itself for a lot of jobs to be created, to see how one can enhance all of those experiences. And I think the second big part is the world has got an aging population, right? And I think physical experiences or physical activities are still going to be needed around the world. And I think as a country like India, we have to be able to use a technology first, a digital first, approach to being able to, capture a large part of those livelihoods. So I think if we have that edge built into our systems and every person, irrespective of which industry one comes from, has a good understanding of that, I think the transition of that job will become easier. Like you talked of AR, for example, right? Augmented reality is an infrastructure that is enabling people to do more. But the design person, the design thinking is still the same, as of today at least. It might change tomorrow, whether the entire piece will just be done by a machine and you may not be needed. But today in this next transition is when you got to be able to invest your effort to be able to make yourself meaningful, at least over the next 5 to 10 years. And I think the challenge is going to be this, right? I think we all come, especially in India, we always said we have a, career for a lifetime. You got one job, you lived it through and you retired, right? Then you had a lifetime of careers, right? We keep saying that you did this, then you went here, you went that. And today you see, that's the way it is. Someone's going into a startup world, becoming a professional, driving an Uber in the afternoon. You suddenly have to find multiple ways to be able to get your livelihood, but that is suited to what you have built as a foundation. I think it is foolish to try and, deviate too much from what is your comfort level and try and go and learn something very new, unless that personality is there in you, right? Otherwise, you try and see what is closest to what you have and find opportunities around that. And I must tell you that there are many, many opportunities there. There are many.
We have to end this conversation. We could go on for much longer, but I think what's very clear is that Metaverse is something which is evolving constantly. I think our ability to evolve with it is very important. Second point is, I think the ethics and the values which are used, which are deployed at the form of designing these solutions are very critical. So we cannot have a bunch of 10 people sitting in Silicon Valley deciding what the rest of the world should be doing. So I think we need a little bit of democratization there. But what's interesting is that a lot of this development is happening in India. And the way countries like India are using Metaverse and new technologies to bring health services, education services, to make sure that hundreds of millions can benefit, I think is fascinating. But in the end, I think, Rajan, what I can summarize is that each of us has to be responsible and take the responsibility to make sure that we change as the metaverse evolves. I think we'll also have to think about not just our own personality, but the multiple personalities that we have to develop to survive. Thank you very much, Rajan.
Thank you. Thank you, Pranjal.